Morning.
Yeah, it is started.
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. Let us start our 11th SOAWAL webinar. And it is going to be, our today's speaker is Dr. Juven Khan. And he is currently working as assistant professor in University School of Law and Legal Studies, Guru Gobind Singh, Indraprastha University, New Delhi. He did his BA LLB honors from Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia, LLM from Indian Law Institute, New Delhi. He completed his PhD in the area of biodiversity law and biopiracy from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. He has taught corporate law to MBA students of IILM Institute, Lodi Road. He also taught at Campus Law Center, University of Delhi as an assistant professor. His specialization is IPR, corporate law, criminal law, and environmental law. He is a member of All India Law Teachers Congress, Indian Institute of Public Administration, and various academic bodies. He held the position of faculty coordinator of Legal Aid Cell, ADR Cell at USLLS, and organized many conferences and seminars at school level. He has been a resource person at many national institutes like ICSI, NIOS, and many law schools across the country, and not only inside the country, outside the country, like UK, Bangladesh, Indonesia, etc. Apart from participating and presenting papers in various seminars and conferences across the country and abroad, he has numerous publications in reputed journals and authored 3 edited books to his credit. So once again, I welcome you, Dr. Juve, and Juve, sorry. And the today's topic on which he is going to enlighten us is ethical consideration in academic research and plagiarism. So, Dr. Juve, you can start your
Thank you.
talk.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'd like to give my sincere gratitude to the HUD ma'am, Professor Abhijit, and my friend Dr. Priyanka Singh for inviting me for the lecture on a very contemporary topic, that is ethical consideration for academic research and uh, and the issue of plagiarism also. This is the subject area which is something which is very important and relevant, not for the social sciences but also for all the streams and for all the subjects also. So that is why we have chosen this topic for an academic discourse today in this lecture. So let me share the PPT with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it my PPT visible to all?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you so much. So, as I said, my topic is ethical consideration in academic research and plagiarism also. Uh, you see, the first of all, the most important thing, as a general concept, since I know the audience is totally different, it's not the law students, not the law faculties, it is not the social science. So I will just go with a different perspective, a general perspective as to what do you understand by research ethics. The moment we talks about research ethics, the word ethics is actually derived from a Greek word that is called as ethos. Uh, so during those ancient times, this what ethics when was in question, when it was in subject matter of discourse in various academic literature. It has been construed. This ethics actually means a kind of a social norms for our own conduct. But it has taken a very different meaning in academic research also. Over the passage of time, different universities which has been established over there also, maybe in social science department and in the but technical science department also, there it has been considered that it will carry certain moral values, it will carry certain you can say personal values altogether. So this is how the ethics has been evolved as to how we create it as a subject matter of social norms also. But with the passage of time, when we saw a huge competition even among the academic research also. We have seen that this researcher's point of view, it also converts the personal integrity of a particular person also. So this very concept of the research ethics seems to be very relevant for our society also. But the most interesting fact we have to see how this research ethics has been evolved over the period of time. and to what extent it has been useful even today also. For example, if you see the relevance of academic research in our country also, and whenever we see the speech of any of our honorable prime minister or of our president or any other leading stakeholder of any industry, he keep on saying that, you see, we since we have to fulfill the vision of Shrestha Bharat, and we have to fulfill the ideals of our social fabric society, where we can promote entrepreneurship and startups also. So in all those matters, whenever we're talking about social progress in general, research ethics becomes very important also. And you see, this research ethics is something which has been subject matter of the discussions on various issues also. There have been different committees which have been established over the period of time, which have discussed about how the research ethical principles can be evolved over the period of time. One of them is this one, Nuremberg Code. Also, there are 10 principles which has come into picture. This was the time period when it was in discussion altogether with regard to how research ethics may be important in the scientific field also. So if you see, the first point it discusses about, research participants must voluntarily consent to the research participation also. Whenever in the field of science, whether you're talking about biotechnology, whether you're talking about, you can say, bioprospecting also, or biodiversity, which is especially my area, or we're talking about the traditional knowledge, the consent of the researcher seems to be a very important factor also. At the same time, we also have to see a very important point out, especially when you're talking about the engineering perspective also, how ethics seems to be important with regard to the consent also. So the consent point is something very crucial factor. Second point, the research aims to contribute to the good of the society. Now, it has been very clear altogether, and even in the last 2 years, we have seen how MHRD have given number of notifications, also along with the UGC and AICT. They have been keep on saying that whatever academic research, whatever PhD thesis have come out together, it must contribute to the society also. So to a certain extent, it actually derive us to a conclusion that somehow social engineering is very important factor. Even in our legal field, we treat law as an instrument of social change. We usually consider law as an instrument of social engineering also. So we believe that whatever kind of a research output we can produce, it must be useful for the society also. So this is how Nuremberg Code, the second principle, we can contextualize in present world, especially from you can say from Indian academic research point of view, across the stream also. The third one, the research must be based upon sound theory or prior animal testing. Of course, this was introduced way back in the early 20th centuries when it was in discussion. So obviously, in those cases, when the animal was subject matter of experimentation, that has been the area why they have highlighted. But we can learn a lesson from this third principle, that somehow whenever we do any kind of experimental research, either based upon which may be qualitative in nature, which may be quantitative in nature also, it should be based upon certain fundamental theories also. So you see, we cannot just do research based upon random hypothesis also. It's very important that whatever research we wanted to do, it must have certain established theory also. And we can critically analyze as to what kind of issues we want to derive from that particular theory. And I'm sure all of the researchers, all of the students who are there must have across number of theories altogether. The other day I was discussing about theory called as syntax theory also, that how this syntax theory seems to be very crucial in mathematical research point of view also, and how they play a very significant role in identifying, in detection, and also in reducing the issues and the concerns of plagiarism as well also. So that's how we have seen that somehow the theory based research seems to be a very important factor. And wherever we go, whenever you read the UGC guideline, whenever you read the AICT guidelines, it has been very clear that the theoretical perspective and the empirical research must have a direct link also. So perhaps that can be one of the lesson which we can derive from this third principle. The fourth, the research must avoid unnecessary physical or mental suffering also. Now, this has been a subject matter of debate and discourse over the last 2 years also, especially in the pandemic time phase, where we have raised many concerns altogether, and it has been found, it has been discussed very seriously by UGC, by MHRD in general also, where number of notification comes that with regard to the academic research, with regard to the scientific research, we also keep in mind that the researcher should not be overburdened also. So that's how his physical or mental suffering seems to be very important also. Of course, there's a threshold limit for doing or creating your own hypothesis, creating your own assumptions for a particular research. And you may be satisfied you with your research output, you may not be satisfied with the research output, or whenever you submit your paper to any of the leading journal also, maybe it's possible your paper might be accepted in one go, or it's possible your paper might receive number of inputs from the external reviewers also. But in all those scenarios, it is very much important that we should avoid all possible kinds of physical or mental suffering also. So this mental distress is something very important area which has been ignored for a sufficient period of time. And the many you can say experts, the ethical experts across the different streams have emphasized this point, that you see this mental distress or this physical suffering is also important point altogether. So this is when we are expecting the threshold limit can be created for research. So I think a threshold limit should be created even for a researcher also. So that's how this is something which we can contextualize from the fourth principle. The fifth principle, no serious injuries can go forward where serious injuries or death can be potential outcomes. Technically, again, it has a very limited scope. It does not deal with these issues, but you something, a kind of a lesson which we can learn from the fifth principle and the sixth principle, that in every kind of academic research, there are different kind of risks which may be involved also. And risks are actually inherent in any kind of academic research also. But at the same time, for an academic researcher who may be a student, who may be in the capacity of a student, who may be in the capacity of a PhD scholar, who may be in the capacity of a teacher also, it is expected from him that he has to assess that risk altogether. Whatever inherent risk we have altogether, that assessment of the risk is something which is very important also. Second thing, why assessment of risk is important? The assessment of risk is important to understand the difference between the reasonable risk and unreasonable risk which he has taken also. So this is something very important in every type of research also. For example, when I was doing my PhD altogether, during that time I was having a conversation with my supervisor. So my supervisor told me with relation to a particular topic, and he told me that, you see, Zubair, you have to be very careful whether whether in conducting the empirical research or in conducting the questionnaire with the people in the field itself, you need to maintain the level of confidentiality also, and it must be reflected in your thesis as well also. Now, I didn't understand this point, but the moment when I interact with the society, when I interact with the stakeholders of different fields altogether, I came to know that yes, sensibility is very important factor. Privacy is a very important factor in those cases. So that's how I understand that yes, confidentiality is also one of the important element of risk for any kind of academic researcher. And this is something which we can contextualize in any type of research altogether, that how the risk may be important factor. So risk assessment is the first stage itself. No doubt, this is something which we have learned from the fifth and the sixth principle also. But at the same time, after risk assessment, there is another principle which is important, that is the risk mitigation also. After creating the difference between reasonable and unreasonable risk, academic researchers is supposed to adopt some kind of a strategy, some kind of a different kind of approach where he can actually reduce the risk also. So again, this is also a kind of, not a kind of a moral responsibility, but I can say this is something which is a kind of an ethical responsibility for a researcher, that whatever risk which we have, we need to mitigate those risks also. So this is how we can learn something from these things also. Now, during those times when this Nuremberg code was introduced altogether, it was done, it was introduced only for a specific subject also. But who knows that somehow over the period of time that this is something where we can contextualize, where we can understood from a broader perspective also. So this is how the research output seems to be very important also. The seventh principle, now this is something very important: proper environment and protection for the participants is necessary also. Now I can say one thing which is important altogether, that whenever we're talking about the kind of research outputs altogether, I have just seen the different kind of when you see the different kind of leading journals. Say for example, if you see American Journal of Applied Mathematics and Technology also, or say you talk about any kind of journal related to my subject itself, I have seen in that journal website usually there's a particular column usually find leading journals also, publication ethics also. What are the publication ethics? Now in that publication ethics, this point has been clearly mentioned altogether, that how the researcher has to identify the literature review, has to identify the hypothesis within a specific limit itself. So this proper environment seems to be a very important factor also. Whatever research output may be have, it must have some consonance with the sustainable development also. Now this is something very important when we're talking about sustainable development. And sustainable development is not a particular area which is refined to only to the social sciences. It is an area which is something which can be understood across different streams also. So this is how where the proper environment and protection of participants seems to be very important factor also. Second one is the experiments can be conducted only by the scientifically qualified persons also. The competency of a person seems to be very important also. Of course the experimental research has to be done based upon as based upon certain theory, which we have discussed earlier also. But at the same time, its evaluation, its can say its introspection has to be done only by a scientifically qualified person also. So this is something where you can say we give some kind of a encouragement to the researcher, we give some kind of a credibility to the research output also, so that it cannot be questioned, it cannot be retracted further also. I'm going to discuss something very a contemporary issue while dealing the issue of plagiarism and the research misconduct also, that is the retraction also. So in the different journals, so leading journals, you will find that there are certain journals who have given special emphasis upon retraction guideline also. Now, this retraction guidelines is a different approach altogether, where they wanted to highlight about academic integrity also, and how academic integrity seems to be a very crucial factor. So this is something where we are going to decide that somehow the research output must give some kind of credibility to the researchers also, and there the evaluation has to be done only by the competent person. That's why it is referred as scientifically qualified person. Second is human subjects must be allowed to discontinue their participation at any point. It talks about one of the major limitation. So of course it does not apply in each and every case of scenario, but a kind of a lesson which we can learn from this ninth principle, that somehow we also need to understand the limitation of a research also. We cannot just go exaggerate the research inputs into evolve everything into one go itself also. So we need to understand what are the limitation also, how do you call it as a matter of exaggeration also, and where we have to decide that this is the threshold limit where we need to decide. So this is a kind of a lesson which we can actually understand either from this ninth principle and the 10th principle also, that what will be the limitation when any kind of research we do also, whether it is based upon qualitative research, whether it is based upon quantitative research. So because in those cases, whatever hypothesis you may choose, it may give a complete adverse picture also. So it's, from a researcher, it is something very important as to what kind of limitation you need to adopt in your research also. So it is very important well in advance while conducting the research, while executing the research, it is expected that these kind of ethical questions must arise in the mind of a researcher also. So this ethical question seems to be a very important area. This is how we can able to understand as to what kind of data will be used, and as to what kind of data should not be used, and what can be data will be used. So what will be the anticipated result also. So this is something a very crucial fact which actually promotes the academic integrity in general also. So this is one of the major guideline which come way back somewhere around 100 years back. But though it has been introduced only for one broad area of research, but kind of a lesson, something which we can learn as to how it may be important factor. There is another research theory which has came into picture over the period of time, that is called as Hellenistic declaration also. Of course, it has a very interesting history altogether, but at the same time, there are few lessons which we can learn again for every type of researcher across different streams. For example, you will see it talks about the necessity of using an independent investigator to review potential research projects also. A researcher is not necessary who has to write a research paper also. Maybe he is going to apply different kind of research projects, maybe in with before DST, before ICSSR, before different kind of the comes the corporate houses who wanted to use their CSR money for their research projects. So we have seen altogether that you see how significant a research project for a kind of for a academician, for a can say PhD scholar, or for even for a student. So there, this kind of can say this principle may seems to be very important also, where we talk about independent investigation also. So this independent investigator seems to be a very important factor. How does it perceive? How do we can play a very important role? Now, the first part seems to be very important, that every researcher must adopt an impartial approach also. Now, this is a major concern for all the type of researcher across many streams also. That is to remove the biases also. Now, it has been recommended from other many leading experienced academic researchers also, that we should avoid any kind of biases also. Now, we have seen that across many academic literature also, where there are different kind of biases which has been classified further by the experts in general, which talks about selection bias, which talks about your sample size bias, which talks about your interviewing bias, which talks about your the other kind of biases which may not give any kind of response. So we call it as a non-responsive bias also. So you see, we have seen that how different kind of biases which has been created altogether. Now, I'm sure it is very important to ponder over as to why these kind of researchers have actually classified this category of biases also. Now, these biases identification seems to be very important also, so that we can have an independent evaluation even of the research hypothesis also. Now, this is also something very integral part of research ethics also. That is why I have discussed about independent investigation. Another point which is important also, we talk about welfare and the health and welfare of the human subjects. This is something which we have read earlier also in the previous this can say number quote, which talks about the limitation of a researcher, especially from his mental and the physical distress point of view. But one more important thing is that is accuracy also. The importance of preserving the accuracy of research results. Now, this is something very interesting, that how so far this accuracy seems to be a very important factor also. Now, it is important that whatever hypothesis which we have created based upon which we started conducting our research, we need to come over there that we need to safeguard all those sects where the accuracy seems to be important also. Now, there are different researchers who have to face certain problem over the period of time regarding the concerns related to the intellectual property right. So we have seen it has been recommended in generally that accuracy of the research output seems to be very important also. How so far your document, your approach seems to be very clear altogether. That is why the accuracy seems to be very clear also. And the other rules which is clearly mentioned, suggestion as to obtaining informed consents. I can give an example altogether with regard to, for example, I was doing research on traditional knowledge, where I have conducted a field research. I have put number of questions before the indigenous people also. So I've taken down this survey altogether. So in those cases, the consent seems to be very important also. So these are the areas which seems to be important also as to what kind of ethical codes which need to be expected from the researchers altogether. Now, apart from that, there have been other research point of view over the period of time. We have seen in the early 80s and late 70s, this law has come into picture. That is Belmont Report of 1979. Now, this Belmont Report of 1779, again, it discusses about all the kind of scientific ethics which we can perceive also. Again, it is something which is expected from everywhere also. So you see, informed consent is something which is inherent in every type of research ethics based principle also. But other than that, assessment of risk, its benefit, there seems to be play a very important role, because Belmont report of ethics is actually talking about two issues, two important issues. One, the issue of transparency. Second, the issue of accountability also. Meaning thereby, whether you wanted to conduct a research product, whether you wanted to write a thesis or say a dissertation, whether you want to write a research paper also, accountability and transparency is very important also. Now, how accountability and transparency actually fit into these conditions, that has been reflected in Belmont report also. There they have discussed also that you see, we have to see altogether as to what kind of data which has been used altogether, how the funding has been used also. For example, we have taken the funding for a research project, so how the funding has to be utilized, that seems to be very important factor also. We also have to see the another issue with regard to this, especially with regard to the transparency, whether it involve any kind of research misconduct also. Now this is a second area of research we're going to discuss also, because you see, research conduct, whenever we do not have any kind of a legal definition of what research conduct. Even for a plagiarism also, we do not have a legal definition. But again, as a common consensus among the legal experts, the social experts in general, and other experts from different fields, they have a very common opinion on this issue, that research misconduct involves any kind of falsification of data. It may involve any kind of fabrication of data. Now, again, falsification and fabrication are two different things, because in falsification, it may include certain partial manipulation to certain extent, but fabrication is some completely concoction altogether, where a data which has been used earlier by somebody else, now it has been constitutionalized and reframed into one in your research output. So that's how this Belmont report have taken a very different stand from the previous two recommendations, either made by the Hindenburg, either made by Helsinki also. So Belmont talking about transparency also. So again, for a researcher of a different discipline also may able to learn this lesson, how significant this issue of I can say the issue of transparency and accountability is for them also. Of course, as I said earlier, the social fabric, the social engineering seems to be very important also. But this is something where we have learned altogether. Second is subject selection also. Now, again, when you're talking about the scientific test altogether, especially with regard to biotechnology research, there the subject selection seems to be very important. That how so far your fairness seems to, the level of fairness which has been adopted, the level of impartiality which has been adopted in conducting the research also. So that's how these three committees, these three major, I can say, ethics based principles play a very significant role in evolving the significance of research ethics across the different disciplines also. I'm sure there can be different other kinds of principles which has been evolved over the period of time in technical fields also, which have discussed about these issues. But but it cannot be denied altogether. These are the general points, these are the general issues which are involved for any kind of researcher also, as to how a researcher has to actually play a very significant role altogether. So these ethical questions must ponder, must come into picture altogether. So this is how a research ethics issues seems to be very important also. Now, after considering this point also, how the research ethics seems to be a very crucial fact, the second question comes about how the plagiarism has to be defined. As I said, that research usually most of the researcher usually construe research misconduct or academic dishonesty as plagiarism. But that is not a true. If I say that plagiarism is actually a subset of this research misconduct also, because I say falsification, which may include partial manipulation and fabrication, and plagiarism, they are two different things also. So that's how the academic, we have to see how so far this, you can say, this academic research seems to be very important. And nowadays, earlier there have been certain researchers who have discussed about a number of issues related to conflict of interest also, and especially in the science based research, conflict of issues seems to be very important also. And even in my social field, social legal field and social economic field also, the conflict of interest is important. In the same way, I'm sure you can also explore how so far in the engineering research also the conflict of interest seems to be very important, especially with regard to the data acquisition, especially with regard to data handling also, how they may play a very significant role. Now, in our overall view, when we try to have a very overall view of research misconduct, plagiarism is something very important factor also. Now, how this plagiarism has come into picture, this is something very important. How it has been defined. Again, I said that there is no legal definition. This is, you can consider as one of the anomaly also. But if you see the website of UGC in general, where in the year 2019, when the UGC come with a stringent, can say, regulation on the plagiarism issue, where they have said that now कि आपको चाहे whether you use Urkund, whether you use Tuntin, also though Tuntin is considered to be a very strong category of can say software which catches the plagiarism, which catches the similarity report. And the regulation does not discuss about the difference between similarity and mechanism, but somehow that regulation has actually defined the word plagiarism also. And there they have said that plagiarism is something, a kind of appropriation of another's, can say, data, another's idea or process or results without giving any kind of credit. So I can say yes, it's a kind of a sincere attempt has been made by yeah, the UGC experts to define this word plagiarism also. But again, it is a very difficult concept. It is not something which we can construe within this nature of definition itself, because this is something where we have a different kind of plagiarism which we're going to identify also. We're going to read different kind of plagiarism where it has been how it has been defined, and what kind of unethical practices which actually indicates that yes, this is also a kind of a plagiarized work also. So that's how we have referred that any kind of misrepresentation, whether it is based upon an idea, whether it is based upon a process, whether it is based upon the research, final research output, and it has been misplaced, it has been misrepresented by somebody else. So where a person who have not give any kind of his own input, who have not given any count of his own labor, he has not given any time period altogether, where he do not have any kind of justification, so that kind of misappropriation is usually called as a plagiarism also. So there are different kind of examples we are going to find out. For example, verbatim is something very important. Now this is something very common across different streams. That is the case of copy paste also. Now this copy paste is something very important, where we have found that certain articles, certain paragraphs has been used in the different journals also. Same in the case while I was reading earlier about how so far the issue of plagiarism, whether does it really exist in the engineering research also or not. So I've come across two different views. One view which says that no, it does not actually exist because it does not fit into this situation, because it involves different kind of mathematical expression, mathematical data. But at the same time, there is a different view also. I'm not sure which view is correct. I'm sure you may explore better because you are specialized in a field. But the second view which you have said, there they have said that you see it is quite possible also, where mathematical expression might be used also. And there they have said that the plagiarism in mathematics is usually, it's usually something which is very similar to the plagiarism which exists in the software programming also, that how the programming codes, how the data has been used all together in the software, in you can say research, there also the same kind of plagiarism can exist there also. So it's very much possible that the copy paste seems to be a very common area of concern altogether. At the same time, we also have seen there is another very common trend, that is the level of paraphrasing. Now, again, paraphrasing is one of the alternative measure which is usually adopted by students, by researchers, by teachers also, to avoid or to reduce the similarity index. Now, this is what we usually do basically. But the real question is it really an ethical principle also? Because you see, when you're talking about research ethics is something, and this plagiarism, the issue of plagiarisms, they are dependent on each other also. They're totally closely connected with each other. You cannot just segregate and understand these two concepts separately also. So, like I said, paraphrasing is something very interesting factor. Whether it is allowed, again, as I said, that is not something which is prohibited. But again, most of the researchers have actually discussed this practice also. They have said that, you see, somehow we have seen that minor alteration in the statement itself, or where you have not acknowledged the resources also, may become a concern. So this is something very important, that even if you go for a paraphrasing, even if you go write where you have understand a particular concept while reading any book, while reading any journal article also, and you wanted to write in your own words, so your articulation should be backed with the citation, proper acknowledgement of the source from where you have read also. Now, this is something very important also, how the academic resource which you have cited along with your own original articulation. Now, this is a common mistake which we usually find even among our students also, even among researchers fraternity also in general, which may include PhD scholars, which may include teachers also, where we have seen that the proper citation has not been made also. Yes, there are different citation rules. For example, in our legal field, usually we follow two kind of measure. For one is, we call it blue book citation also. Second one is the oscala citation also, and it depends upon the journal to the journal also which kind of citation has been also. And yes, journal of APA also is something very common, especially for the IGI global journals like IGI global, or even for the many of the scopus index journals also. So this is something very important, how so far this your citation has been done also. So acknowledgement is a mandatory part. This is something very important, where we can possibly reduce the level of plagiarism also. As I said earlier, in the you see in the recent this UGC guideline, now they have said that only below 10% of the similarity report can be allowed and can be justified. And even before 10%, the stringent punishment is mentioned in the regulation. कि भाई अगर आपके 60% plagiarism report है, then in those cases you may be asked to withdraw your submission, your manuscript. And again, maybe different other appropriate punishment may be taken in the form of suspension of or can say termination of your job also. Of course, that hue and cry which was made during that time when this UGC came with this guideline, and to what extent it is true or not, and it is a subject matter of debate. But the most important point which has been highlighted about the type of plagiarism which has been important. Second one is patchworking also. Now, this is how I have referred detailed or deliberate or detailed presentation of another one concept as one own also. Now, usually, again, this is a subject matter of discourse, where I have seen across that there are certain leading can say schools of engineering and science and technology, even law schools. They have conducted their own random research among their students community also, regarding the level of awareness of plagiarism issue. And what they have found out surprisingly, that of course substantial percentage, I will not name the exact percentage, but substantial percentage of the students, they do not have any kind of acquaintance about the issue of plagiarism also. So again, this is something very important. The lack of knowledge of plagiarism is a very important factor with it. But at the same time, they've also found that there have been substantial percentage of certain students and researchers who willfully do this kind of research, by knowing this thing, that what can be the legal consequences, what can be the penal consequences of the same. Their research output may be withdrawn at the later stage, which may include the element of retraction also. Now, retraction is something different from plagiarism. This is something we're going to read also. But what I'm trying to say, from these kind of research, whenever we read any journal altogether, it actually indicates that in all possible means the willful behavior or the deliberate behavior of conducting research through by using plagiarized text must be discouraged also. So this is how the someone which has been taken into consideration. But this is not the only thing also. We also have seen that there have been certain number of cases where we found where we can say Hawks author has been come into picture also. Now this is a common practice which we all usually find, and I will not hesitate in issue these things, where we have seen that a PhD scholar have written his paper or her paper also, and the PhD supervisor has also added his name also. Now, whether he has given his input or not, that is a question mark. So again, it is also subject matter of deliberation. It's an important ethical question which must rise in any academic research as to what kind of research output he is giving, even in the case of collaborative research also. So in the case of collaborative research, this Hawks research output is something very common, where we find out one deceptive trick has been adopted when one person who has not contributed anything, but still his name was input because a high index Scopus journal asking for a huge amount of money as an article processing fees also. So again, I will not call it as a plagiarism issue as such, but yes, this is something where we found altogether sometimes the proper citation also includes sufficient and adequate citation. It does not mean superfluous citation. And as I have found out in myself, that there are certain researchers who keep on citing many things altogether which do not have any kind of relation with the main context, with the main literature of the article. Now, this is something very important, that superfluous citation also must be discussed. And why the superfluous citation has come into picture? There are different kind of empirical research which we have seen, which have said this thing that yes, this is the case where we have identified number of Hawks. So can say authors who has been added to the this kind of text also. So ये कुछ type के researches हैं. Like another thing, there is another category of research which is quite common. We call it as a patch working also. Now this patch writing is also something very common factor which we have seen also. But there is another thing which is important, which we usually discuss, and I'm one of the student usually ask this question, that whether this plagiarism is actually considered as a violation of the copyright law. Now you see, copyright is something, a subject matter of an IPR also. So in IPR we have a law that is called as Indian Copyright Act also. So this is a subject matter of debate, whether the plagiarism is something which is same to the issue of copyright violation. Answer is no. Plagiarism is usually considered totally different from the this copyright violation also, because you see in them you may find different kind of overlapping research output. What we find out, one person may copy numerous works altogether of someone else, but and where he made certain citation altogether, and even after citation they may not be called as a plagiarism, but it will be case of a copyright violation, which is against the fair use of some other work. So you cannot just use the original content of somebody else, and where you have written you have also given the citation, and that can be allowed. Still, it will not be called as legitimate work also. But plagiarism is something different, because plagiarism is something where you do not, there is no reference of citations, there is no reference of acknowledgement, and you have just cut, copy, paste altogether. But somehow we have seen, and we have, it has been observed altogether from various judgments also. If you ask me, I can name it down, like this is one of the leading case, RG Anna versus Deluxe Films also, where, and there have a number of provisions of the Indian Copyright, like section 63, section 64 of Indian Copyright Act, which have clearly mentioned that even those kind of practices which is against fair use also. Fair use is basically where you have cited the someone else's work also, and you have used the same original content, you have not articulated in your own words also. There also it is violative act also. So this is how we have seen a kind of a clarification as also seems to be very important when we're trying to understand as to what is the difference between plagiarism and the issue of copyright violation also. And this is how I have mentioned about minor plagiarism also to certain extent. Yes, at the same time, UGC, AICT, and the other different leading bodies, they have clearly mentioned that yes, to certain extent, if there is an element of minor discrepancies or minor alteration has been done, or even if there have been certain similar, the similarity percentage is relatively very less, then in those cases it can be cordoned off also. So the minor plagiarism is not any kind of a serious threat as such to the integrity and the can say the ethical values of the researcher or the research output. But the major plagiarism is a major issue altogether. It depends again upon the level of percentage which has come into picture also. To what extent you have taken the direct resources, that seems to play a very important role also. So this is where we have clearly mentioned, either in the case of collaboration or either in the case of authorship also, any kind of unauthorized collusion is something very important. So that's how the two classification has been generally made by all the researchers in general. So minor plagiarism is something can be cordoned, but major plagiarism is something subject matter of serious contemplation also, and which must be discouraged also because it has penal consequences also. So this is how I have discussed also. Collusion is also again something very important. As I said about the same thing which we have discussed, we have seen some kind of unauthorized collusion, unauthorized collaboration also, where many Hawks author has been added, his name has been added altogether. So we have seen that these kind of research can say process must be discussed over the period of time also. Any kind of fabrication of data is something very important also, where something which we have used. Now I have read about these things also as to how fabrication can be done, like improper designing, different biases which has been created. As I said, there have been sample size also. Maybe you may create your own bias with regard to your sample size, and where you may make give a complete ignorant picture to your own supervisor, to your own research examinee also, regarding your these biases which you have created. So it is possible where a different picture might have shown altogether with the with the use of by acquiring certain data through different deceptive means also. So fabrication of data, it seems to be very important factor altogether. But overall, the major questions usually come as to how to reduce plagiarism also. Is it the proper citation is the only thing, or is it only the articulation of concepts in your own words, maybe the only measure, remedial measure to detect and to reduce the issue of plagiarism, the issue of similarity also? But what I find out, especially in your mathematical research also, there are different kind of approaches which has been adopted. And somehow, if I understood the whole concept, I have somehow able to relate with my legal and social research also. So where we have found out, there is one principle I'm sure you most of you must be aware about. We call it as a syntax based approach. Now this syntax based approach is something very important factor, where we found out that the sophisticated of knowledge of mathematical equation has been presented through a different meaning also. So we have seen how synonymous representation of some mathematical construction has been normalized also. Different variable names has been given, different mathematical normalization has been used also. So yes, it is one of the practice which has been adopted by many European researchers, many American researchers also. Yes, it is again subject matter of debate and subject matter of discourse further, to what extent this syntax based approach may be helpful in reducing the plagiarism. But yes, we can make that, yes, this is one of the measure also where we can reduce the plagiarism issue. There is a second approach which is quite common. We call it as a structure based approaches also. And we have seen that there are certain kind of researchers who keep on using different kind of language like XML there also. So what they have done, they have tried to use the mathematical expressions in the form of tree also. Now we also do it same thing also. Whenever we wanted to use any kind of you can say any kinds of diagram or any kinds of pictorial representation of certain things in our research, or usually we do not allow, in fact we discourage our students to use the same kind of pictorial representations, because it will be cached in your Tantin or through this checking also. But at the same time, when you trying to contextualize from a different pictorial representation, this is something where it can be there also. So again, this is also one of the common practices, structural approach, which has been done also, where we have seen that even in the mathematical research, how the mathematical expression has been reduced in the form of tree also, and how the different similarity scores has been created altogether. And there we also have seen there is another kind of approach, we call it as a hybrid approach also. Now this is hybrid approach, it's something a kind of a mix of syntax and structural this approach also. So where different kind of normalized theories has been used also. Then there is a fourth one which we also has been common, semantic approach. Now this is something I can relate in my legal research also. Now usually when you're talking about semantic approach, it's basically actually means where the mathematical expressions can be used in the form of a code words also. For example, when you're talking about energy, so you can give it the name of E only. So there in our ones also, the abbreviation is something has been mostly highlighted, mostly increased also. And to certain extent we say how semantic research approaches may be quite useful in reducing and also in removing the ambiguities in the research output. So yes, these kind of four researchers, I'm sure there must be many more approaches also which may be evolved over the period of time by different researchers. But they have been very clear that these kind of researchers may play a very significant role in reducing the or in detecting the plagiarism issue also, especially with regard to minor plagiarism. Because you see, major plagiarism is something which cannot be undone ourselves, which cannot be, where we do not have an alternative remedy where we can reduce. It's better to withdraw that manuscript and write a fresh manuscript altogether, because we know the kind of legal consequences, the kind of penal consequences which we have with regard to this major plagiarism issue also. This is how the research output has to be taken into consideration also. But there is one more thing which is important, that is about retraction guideline. As this is one of the guideline which has been used by different journals, and it has been encouraged by different scientific bodies across the globe also. We have seen that this is kind of mechanism altogether where they give a kind of an opportunity to the researcher to to correct their own literature also. And they also wanted to give a kind of a caution to the readers regarding the particular publication also. So again, this retraction guideline, it's not something you can say which meant only for a punishing the researcher itself, but their main purpose is only to promote the academic integrity also. Their main purpose is to identify, yes, these are the lapses which we find, or these are the findings or conclusions which has been overlapped with the previous records of the previous research also. So somehow a researcher like us must know about as to what is the retraction guideline and what is the objective of retraction guideline also. Yes, we have seen certain cases, because I have came across one of my known friend who is an editor of a journal, and there one of the author filed a suit against a legal suit against him also, based upon the retraction guideline also. So yes, there have been certain legal complications also, no doubt about it. But at the same time, the awareness of retraction guideline is also very important, as to understand altogether, to know whether your research findings, whether your research outcome is based upon certain serious flaws or not. So this may be an idea altogether. Somehow we can relate with the overall perspective research, or this can say the output altogether, which involves any kind of misconduct, maybe involve manipulation, may involve fabrication, may involve any kind of unauthorized collusion, which we have read earlier also. So these are the things which seems to be important when we're trying to understand retraction guideline, especially in context of plagiarism also. So I think this may be the issues which I like to concern as to what should we expect from a qualitative research, or what are the expectation from a quantitative research also. So I'm open for any kind of question, any kind of remarks.
Thank you,
Any
Dr. Khan.
questions?
Yeah. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, Sai Gopal sir, please
Hello.
unmute yourself. Yeah,
Hello.
ask
Yeah,
questions.
thank you, sir, for the talk. I would like to ask, especially in mathematics, what happens? Most of our research papers are based on mathematical expressions and all that notations. So usually we write from the above identity, we obtain something, or the this one yields the following. So that those lines also means shows as plagiarism. So there are only some fixed words that we obtain or we get like that only. So I would like to request you to say something on this.
Okay. Yes, sir. I'm trying to understand your question, but what I have understood that you see, we researchers often face this problem whenever we submit our paper to any kind of software, maybe Turnitin or maybe Urkun, and maybe possibly where we may get the higher degree of percentage of the similarity report. So of course, it ponders it causes a great concern to all of us. So usually in those scenarios, as I said, that there have been certain practices which has been evolved over the period of time. So usually what we can do, we can adopt the practice of paraphrasing. Again, there's a rule of caution. Usually, as I have referred about, syntax based practice also. Now, this syntax based practice approach is basically that kind of approach where we can use variable names, where we can use synonymous representation also. So, possibly in those cases, that kind of paraphrasing which we have done with a proper citation, that seems to be very important. I can give an example. I wrote an article for a particular journal also, and that journal allows me to follow a particular citation rule. That citation rule has been created not based upon the leading the rule of citation, which is a blue book or which is an Oxford rule of citation, but it is based something which has been created by that school only also. So when I put my manuscript in the Tantin itself, all of my citation where has been cast by the Tantin force, and everywhere I was there. So I found it very surprising. So I've asked my few from my friends, and they have told me that you see this kind of software, it actually synchronizes with the leading rule of citation, possibly with the Blue Book or possibly with the Oscar also. So in those cases, I wrote a representation to the editor and asking about these issues also. So there he do not have an idea, but he given this opinion. Okay, you can just adjust it accordingly to the something which is conducive to the this particular software that is turned in also. So again, I have changed the whole citation in the form of Oscola and again submitted the thing. And there I found it surprisingly the similarity percentage of my manuscript has been substantially lower down altogether. So what I'm trying to say that sometimes synonymous representation of your work with proper citation, those citation which have been recognized, may play a very important role. And please try to explore, there's a concept called as notational normalization. Now this notational normalization is something very important also, where we have seen that there are different kind of similar characters has been used having a different unicode also. So maybe those technical terms may be quite useful for you whenever you use mathematical expressions in different contexts, possibly in the form of structural based approach, like I said, maybe in the form of tree, also where you have given a different pictorial representation, possibly in the form of synonymous representation or variable names, where maybe in those cases the similarity percentage will be reduced over the period of time also. So this is how your mathematical expressions can may not may have the same kind of percentage which you usually get at the first hand when you submitted your report to the software like Urkun or software like Urkun, the stunt in general also.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Can I?
ma'am. I
Yeah.
have one. Hi, sir. I have a question suppose if we are going through an research article and then there is a mathematical statement since we are from mathematics background. So it is or it might be possible to prove the given statement by using some other method, right? It is quite possible in mathematics area. I have got one idea, some other may have got another idea to prove the statement. So what is your thoughts about it? Shall we go, or with the statement, I should write the proper citation that I have taken the statement from that particular paper and now I am trying to prove the result by my own method. So
Yes, you have asked a very valid question. This is again common concern. But
yeah,
as I discussed earlier, we need to understand the difference between copyright violation and the plagiarism. Plagiarism is a pure case of copy paste without any acknowledgement, without any
acknowledgement.
citation also.
Yeah,
And copyright violation is also a major concern because this is something which cannot be ignored, which cannot be taken easily also. It cannot be taken as casually also. And where we're talking about the fair use of author, of different author, which I'm trying to say that when we use the original content or the original content of somebody else, and that too with having proper citation, still it will not be called as a legitimate work also. So it is better to do the articulation of the statement in your own words also. Now again, it of course this kind of nature of work of articulation has its own limitation in the mathematical research, as discussed by you also. So
yeah,
in that case, you may not change your hypothesis, but the language of your hypothesis maybe have a different opinion also. So in those cases, if your language of hypothesis may include certain contemporary issues, may include certain explorative issues, then in those cases it might resolve, it might address the particular your point also. So what I'm trying to say that your own, I can say, articulation may be quite useful in resolving that problem also. Otherwise, usually we consider whenever you use the same kind of hypothesis, the same kind of similar kind of hypothesis in all the kind of researches, this problem is generally will arise. There is no doubt about it. But the main only solution in that case altogether as to what kind of semantic procedure which has been adopted. For example, that semantic procedure may be in the form where the abbreviated languages or the code languages which has been used altogether. So usually we also preferred this semantic approach in our research also. So yes, semantic approach or the articulation of the statement in your own words may be one of the solution to this common concern also.
okay, thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Can I ask a question, sir?
Yes, sir.
First of all, it's a very important and a very interesting topic. My question is actually related to the 10 ethical principle you just explained. The third one was, I think, that is research on based must be based on sound theory and prior animal testing. So, sir, could you explain why it is must? Just I want to know.
Yes, sir. I have discussed this point where I have discussed about the sound proof theory and the animal testing. Of course, when this principle was introduced, that was principle was introduced for a scientific research, especially for human cloning in that time also. That was the one year approach. But something which we can learn from this principle from present say that whatever the subject matter of research we choose, that must not be compromised, that must not be overutilized also. So so it's something very important. And when you're talking about theoretical perspective also, that you cannot create hypothesis based upon your own I can say mere assumptions also, that should be based upon certain research. So what I'm trying to say that whenever we need to start writing a research paper, whether it is a qualitative one, whether it is a quantitative one also, we must have a brief idea about the research also. What is my objective? Whether it is a research paper, whether it's a research thesis, whether it is a dissertation, or whether it is a research project. Before we start it or writing the project altogether, before write start the content also, it is important to understand the objective of the research. And within the framework of objective research also, we must have a conceptual clarity of the theoretical issues also, as to what kind of theories which may be evolved, what are the theories which may be directly indirectly associated with this research problem also. So you see, whenever we identify a research problem for writing research paper, the conceptual clarity of the theory seems to be very important also. We must not have any kind of doubt, we must not have any kind of ambiguity with regard to the conceptual clarity of a theory also. If we have a strong basis, then in those cases it will be easy for us to go forward to complete our task within a stipulated time frame also, as situation also. Because we have seen that there are, for example, there are many researchers, there are many, even for example my of the students they have come to me and they are saying, sir, we are facing this problem, and I'm writing this research paper for a quite long period of time, I'm not able to finish within a stipulated time period also. And it has actually resulted into physical distress and mental distress also. So what is there, the time is a very important factor for all of the researchers. So we wanted to complete our target within a stipulated time period कि हाँ भाई इतने time period पे हमें अपना research output clear करना, चाहे कुछ भी हो, whether it is research paper, whether it is research project also. So it's something very important that the conceptual clarity of the theory is very important. Then only we can use that theory, whatever kind of subject we are dealing with. We use the theory in our research hypothesis also. Whatever research questions we have framed, that theory can be adjusted, that theory can be utilized also. And to what extent it can be utilized, that depends upon the accuracy of the problem, accuracy of the research output. कि वो सही है हमारा हमारा hypothesis वो सही भी था, or whether the whole hypothesis went wrong altogether. So this is how we usually construct as to how the theoretical framework seems to be very significant for every researcher across all the disciplines in general.
So still means in conceptual theory we should add the means the sound theory and animal testing. I didn't get yet.
Now, animal testing is something very different, because you see, when it was introduced, that was introduced with regard to cloning issue also, because that is something a very narrow approach. But I said that something where we can contextualize something which we have learned from this thing also. Because when you're talking about animal testing, it's something which is based upon one way of the theory altogether. Now, it could have been mentioned about plant testing also. For example, if a particular researcher who is working upon, say, on plant varieties act also. So in that case, the plant varieties is something which cannot be fit into that situation also. So I have discussed that theory when it was introduced. That theory was introduced for only one way of researchers also who wanted to do experiment research upon the animals also. But at the same time, over the period of time, that kind of ethical principle seems to be important for across the disciplines also. Maybe the animal testing does not fit into other institutions, but a lesson can be learned that we must not compromise with the research subject matter also. Whatever research subject we are going to choose, that must not be misused, that must not be contextualized also. I can give an example also how experimental research seems to be important. One of my friend, she was doing a research on the rising cases of domestic violence in urban state also. So what she did, she prepared a list of questionnaires, and she approaches the different stakeholders while contacting different legal service authorities also. So she came to know that yes, these are the cases which has been filed before the court of law, and she tried to approach those victims. But the interesting part is all those victims of domestic violence, they have refused to share any information with my researcher friend also. And they're saying that, look, this is a matter of privacy, and the case is pending before the court of law. We are not going to share your issue altogether. So she went back to his supervisor and she stated this concern. Then the supervisor have said this thing very clearly, that you see, we need to understand the sensibility of a research subject also. You are dwelling upon a research upon a subject matter that is about the victims, what is the impact of domestic violence on the victims also. So when you're doing a research upon the victims, you cannot go and ask the victims about the questions about their own private life, and they're going to share every information which is relevant for you. So you need to collect the data from different other sources also. It may not be possible where you can have a direct approach to the victims where there is a hesitancy to give this kind of information also. So what I'm trying to say, sometimes the research subject matter seems to be very important. How it can be utilized, to what extent, what are the limitations that needs to be seen also. That is why this is a lesson which we can learn from the Henberg principle, which talks about animal testing. Of course, animal testing is something which is mean for, as I said, only for a one way and narrow approach altogether. But a lesson is something which can be learned, that to what extent the research subject can be used also.
Now understood, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
So any other questions from anyone?
So, can you tell me in short how government bodies in India like UGC and all others they act on all these things?
How can you repeat the question again?
In India, like there are some government bodies like UGC, CSIR, yeah, how they act on this plagiarism and all other details. I mean, there must be some laws, na? Some people or some researchers must be reporting about the plagiarism and all these things.
Yes, in the year
Yeah.
2019, UGC has come up with a regulation on this issue, where they have clearly mentioned about the plagiarism also. And they said that the plagiarism is a very serious issue altogether and it has to be addressed. So they have said that up to the 10% of the plagiarism issue, we cannot, it can be allowed also. But if it is more than 10%, then it is subject matter issue also. So depending upon the percentage, they have mentioned about the penal consequences, they have mentioned about the legal consequences also. So you can see that the way in which they have drafted the word plagiarism and the way they have drafted the punishment, it actually reflect, they wanted to show it to the academic fraternity that this is a deterrent kind of effect altogether, that if any kind of research output was caught as a plagiarized work where the percentage is more than, say for example, 20%, more than, say, up to 60% also, then in those cases the actions can be taken altogether. For example, say up to 40%, they have said that the withdrawal of the manuscript has to be done also. If it is more than 60%, then in those cases the increment of, if it is a faculty member, then the increment of the faculty members can be stopped also. If it is more than 60%, then in those cases not only there, the actions can be taken against that person also. अगर उसका manuscript है, maybe in the form of his PhD or his dissertation, then that can be cancelled also. So you see, the regulation of UGC have come up with this regulation altogether where it can have a deterrent effect. And of course, I have seen certain lawyers who approach the court of law, and where they have said कि ये जो regulation है, this regulation actually talks about plagiarism, but at the
Yes,
same
sir.
time, Turnitin or Urkund, it actually talks about similarity. You try to appreciate the point. They're talking about similarity. And
Similar,
there's a
right.
substantial difference between similarity and plagiarism, because what we're trying to construe, though we do not have a definition of what plagiarism, but we're trying to construe as a plagiarism is something which has been copy pasted from something else also.
Something else.
But similarity is something different, because similarity is something where you find the similar text in the previous research paper also, in the previous records of some other data also. So
And
this is,
like sir, page numbers or something. Even sometimes footnotes also. Even the page numbers also getting in
yes,
similarity index.
yes, yes. So we often ask, when I was doing the research, this thing altogether for the first time, when I was submitting my research, there are certain portions of the similarity were found in my this citation. Irrespective of the fact, I have used a very leading citation of a research, that is of Blue Book. Then I was surprised कि यार मैंने ब्लू बुक यूज किया है, फिर भी मेरे जो वो सिमिलरिटी इंडेक्स जो है परसेंटेज वो मेरे साइटेशन में शो करा. How does it is it possible? So then I came to know about this fact, that you see, we need to understand that of course it is our job to reduce the similarity index. As per the law, we have to follow, we have no other option. But the problem exists altogether, because you see, these leading softwares, they wanted to define about similarity, and in their code of conduct, nowhere the word plagiarism has been used. And interestingly, the plagiarism has been used in the UGC regulation also. So they are not clear कि भाई वो plagiarism है कि वो similarity है as such. So yes, there are many lawyers who have actually filed the case before the court of law, but again, the matter has not been heard even till now. So let's hope in the near future this matter has been resolved, or possibly we may receive some kind of notification from the UGC where they're going to understand they're going to make it understand the difference between similarity and the plagiarism. But overall, it has been very clear whether it is the case of similarity, whether it is the case of plagiarism, that must be discussed at all means also.
तो जब तक ये इशू सॉल्व नहीं हो जाता हम रिसर्चर्स ऐसे ही पिसते रहेंगे.
Sir, पीछे तो रहेंगे, but at the same time, the authority will not take into consideration, ना sir. The point is, हाँ, जब हमारा केस का promotion होता है, when we submit the paper report, we cannot argue before the examinee also that look, these are the concerns. They are not going to listen this thing. They are going to decide based upon the merit, based upon the report, based upon the publication which you have cited. So somehow it all possible means we have to take precautions. That is something which is expected. This is something which we can instruct our research scholars and our students कि भाई आप ऐसे research paper लिखें, so that your documentation must have a reduced level of percentage also.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Juve. That's a really nice presentation, and you threw some light on this research ethics. I think everyone will be benefited from this topic, and thank you so much. So I request our coordinator, Dr. Vijit, to offer the vote of thanks.
Thank you, HOD madam. So at the end of the 11th Siksha Anusandhan weekly academic lecture, I, Dr. Bhubaneswar, the co-convener of this weekly series of webinars organized by the Center for Applied Mathematics and Computing, shall take the liberty of proposing the vote of thanks. We thank the speaker, Dr. Zubair Khan, whose talk has undoubtedly enriched our knowledge on such an indispensable role of plagiarism in academic research. Specifically, I came to know from this lecture that there is a difference between similarity, plagiarism, and copyright. So, thank you. Our thanks due to the colleagues, research scholars, and students in the audience. And our big thanks go to Dr. Manoj Ranjan Naik, the Honorable President of Siksha Anusandhan University, who's, who has been a source of inspiration to all of us. I extend our thanks to Professor Manjula Das Madam, the head of the Center for Applied Mathematics and Computing, for the necessary supports, and Dr. Priyanka Singh for connecting with Dr. Khan. Lastly, I, on behalf of the Center for Applied Mathematics and Computing, Siksha Anusandhan Limited University, extend our heartfelt thanks to all. Thank you, Dr. Khan, once again for such a wonderful talk and for interacting with us. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
thank
ma'am.
you, Dr. Khan.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
Priyanka.
Thank
you,
you,
Abhi.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So I'm officially ending the recording and ending the
Yeah.
meeting also.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.